Well, welcome everyone. Let me take a moment and welcome all of you that are joining us online right now on our live stream, or those of you joining at our other services. We're so glad that you've chosen to be with us today. For those of you that are visiting our church family today, my name is Aaron. I'm the pastor here of Coastline Church, and we just wanted to say a special welcome to you and let you know how glad we are that you chose to be with us today. In fact, when you came in today and they gave you the worship guide, this was actually written with you in mind. Hopefully, it'll answer any basic questions you may have about today's church experience or a little bit about who we are as a church family. Inside, you're going to find our message notes with our small group discussion guide. And then the most important thing that we highlight every week is this little blue card. This is our prayer card. I feel like this is one of the greatest things we can offer you as a church. And I really feel like it's what sets the church apart from every other business in town. Because when you think about it, where else can you go today where there's a group of people willing to connect with a supernatural, a living God on your behalf, to pray with you and to pray for you and to take it very seriously. And so I want to encourage you, whatever challenges that you are facing right now in life, don't face them alone. We would love to pray with you and to pray for you. I read through all the cards this last week and was praying over them, especially after last week's message. How many of you feel like Chad did a great job last week? Chad and Tasha have become very dear friends of Amanda and I, and if you did not have a chance to listen to the message last week, I cannot encourage you enough to listen to it online, especially in light of what just happened here just an hour away from our church, where there was that young pastor north of us who took his life. That could have very easily been Chad. Just a few years ago, Chad was living in that darkness, and God has brought him out of it. And he talked a lot about that last week in his message. And it hit a nerve, because there's a lot of people, as I was reading through the prayer cards, struggling, depression and just going through some very difficult situations. So I would encourage you, don't face them alone. Let us pray with you and pray for you. Take a moment, fill out the card. At the end of the service, you can give it to any one of our leaders or drop it in any tithe and offering box. We'll have a team of people praying for you. Well, I'm excited about the Israel trip coming up. You just saw the video. And how many of you are just grateful that for the technology that God gives us to be able to present the gospel to people? We're trying to get better in every way as a church and increase capacity in every way. And technology like the screen behind me allows us to do that. It allows us to make it a better experience for the services that I can't physically be at live, as we're creating more opportunity for people. We know that there are many people in this community that need to hear the message about Jesus, and we want to present it in the most dynamic way possible. And physically, you can only speak so many times a week, and we want to create more opportunity for people. And I hope we never forget that the reason we do church is not simply for the people who are in this room right now, but the reason we do church is for the people who are not here yet. Because how many of you understand there are people in this community right now who don't know Jesus, and their marriages are falling apart, their families are falling apart, and they need hope. And we have a responsibility to create space and to create room and make it possible for more people to come and hear what we've heard, to receive what we've received, to be impacted the way so many of us have been impacted. And so let us never forget as a church that we're not doing this simply for us, but we're doing it for the people who are not here yet. Let's never forget what it was like to be one of those people. I don't know about you, but for years of my life, I wasn't in a place like this every week, and I didn't have hope. And my life was falling apart and broken until I was invited. And I thank God that the church I was invited to made space for me. And they created an opportunity for me. And so that's what we want to do as a church, is make as much space and opportunity as possible for people. Well, Israel's coming up. Actually, the slide went away. This is the message slide. Israel's coming up in March, and so I would encourage you, if that's on your bucket list, go onto our website and get all of the information and details there. I'd love you to join us. We have one of the top Bible scholars in the world, one of the top archaeologists who's lived in Israel for years, leading the tour with me, and so it's going to be one of those opportunities to go very, very deep. I love going to Israel. It's made me better as a pastor. I feel like it's made me a better teacher. It's helped me understand the Bible at a new way, to be able to communicate it more effectively. And so I love the opportunity. And so if that's something that's on your bucket list, we encourage you to consider it. And we have a month to get the sign-ups in for the March trip. So go on the website and check that out. Well, thank you for allowing me to go on vacation last week. I was able to take a weekend off and really take a week off with my family. But I don't know if you've ever traveled with a baby. How many of you realize it's not a vacation? Like, they are needy, and they never let you rest. Like, you can't just, lock them in the hotel room and just leave them for, a few hours. You got to be with them every second of the day. I've forgotten what it was like to travel with a 16-month-old because our other son is now 10 years old, and it is very, very different. You have this fantasy of how relaxing and everything's going to be, and you come back more tired than before you left. But I tell you, the one thing that happens to me every time I have that chance to get away is it just makes me so grateful for this church. Like, I want you to know how much I love this church and I love you. You give me the opportunity to do what God created me to do. And I will never take that for granted. And I get to do what I was made for, and it's my dream. It's like I'm living out my dream, and I want to thank you, and especially our dream team. Those of you that work so hard every single week to make everything we do possible. You make my life a reality and allow me to do what God has created me to do. And I love this place, and I love you, and just thank you for that. If you got your message notes out, let me say one more thing. How many of you tried the new coffee? I leave for a week, I come back, the coffee is amazing. And I've heard from so many people that are talking about, what did you switch the coffee? I was like, I don't know what the bean is, but it is so much better than the coffee we had 2 weeks ago. So if you haven't tried the new coffee, try the new coffee. It is excellent. They said we have some connection in Colombia now, and they're starting the process of making the Coastline Colombian coffee bean, or whatever it is, but it's good coffee. That's all I got to say. We're in this series on Galatians. We have 2 weeks left, this week and the following week. We're starting chapter 6 today, and we'll finish it next week. It's been 19 weeks of Galatians. And there's a few reasons why we did it that way. We went slow intentionally because I wanted to show you how to study the Bible, in a sense, to show you that you can take any book of the Bible, go through it very, very slowly, and extract so much spiritual truth and life from it. So I hope you got a feel for that over the last 19 weeks. And then the other reason is Galatians is so rich. This little letter that Paul wrote 2,000 years ago has so much to say about our life today. So good. Today we're going to dig into, as Paul's kind of concluding the letter, we're going to look at how does the gospel, because the whole book of Galatians is about the gospel, how does it impact our relationships? How does it impact the way we relate to one another, the way we relate to our spouse, our husband, our wife, our children? How do we relate to parents? How do we relate to coworkers? How do we relate to friends? How does the gospel affect, in other words, the way I look at myself in terms of those around me? How does the gospel affect the way I look at others in terms of myself? And what we're going to look at, what Paul's giving us today, is principles for gospel relationships. Key principles that people who look at their life through the gospel and live their life through the gospel utilize, and it impacts the relationships around us. The last couple of weeks we were dealing with the fruit of the Spirit and what it means to keep in step with the Spirit. Today we're going to look at how that impacts those relationships. So a very short passage we're looking at today. We're going to deal with the last verse of chapter 5 and the first 5 verses of chapter 6. So let's dig into it and then we'll break it apart. It says here, "Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load." So to sum all that up, and we're gonna break it down, the gospel makes us neither self-confident nor self-disdaining. It doesn't make us feel better than other people, but it also doesn't make us look down on ourselves. In fact, what the gospel does is it makes us incredibly bold and incredibly humble at the exact same time. And that impacts the relationships around us. You see, the gospel allows me to walk in humility because I realize that without Christ, I am a sinner. I'm lost and I need a Savior, that my effort, my performance, all of the good that I could possibly do with my life isn't enough. I need Jesus, and so that keeps me humble. But at the very same time, I realize that the God who created the universe, who hung every star in the heavens, who created planet Earth and everything in it, loves me so much that He gave His own Son in exchange for me. That makes me incredibly bold because I know I'm loved. I know I'm accepted. So I'm bold, but I also know I'm a sinner and I'm in need of a Savior, and it makes me humble. And that's what happens when you live your life through the gospel, when you look at your life through the gospel, and it brings us into some key principles in how we relate to other people. So 4 things that Paul challenges us with. First one is we guard against becoming conceited. The first thing, if you're gonna live your life through the gospel and relate to other people, you have to guard yourself against becoming conceited. Now, what does the word conceited mean? Well, what I want to do is I want to look at the Greek language for a moment. For those of you new to Christianity, this letter that the Apostle Paul wrote was written in the original Greek language. We have an English translation. And sometimes what I like to do is I like to look up the original Greek word and look at the definition because it gives me kind of added nuance or added meaning. And when you do that with this word conceit, what it means is vainglorious or vainglory or empty of honor. Now, what does that mean? Empty of honor. You see, what Paul is saying is when you are conceited, when you have conceit in your life, you have a deep, deep insecurity. And the insecurity is because there's this perceived absence of honor or there's an absence of glory. And when you live your life with an absence of honor, when you live your life empty of honor, then you are going to do whatever it takes to make yourself feel worth to yourself and to others. You're going to try to prove your worth to yourself and to other people. You're going to either make yourself feel better than others, or you're going to make yourself feel good enough for yourself, and it manifests in either feeling better or feeling worse in comparison to other people. So Paul says in verse 25, let us not become conceited. And here's what's very interesting. And it makes so much sense when you study it. He gives us 2 manifestations of what happens in our life when we're conceited. When we're conceited, we're either going to become provoking or we're going to become envying. We're going to be provocative or we're going to be jealous. See, what does it mean to provoke? Provoke is this competitiveness. It's to challenge someone to a contest. That's what provoking is. Envying is to want something that rightfully belongs to someone else or not to want them to have it. Like, how many know there's 2 forms of envy? I either want what you have or I feel like you don't deserve it and you shouldn't have it either. If I don't have it, nobody should have it. And so what do we have here? We have provoking, which is a form of a superiority complex. See, when you live a provoking life, you feel superior. Like, I'll challenge you. I'm better than you. I can challenge you. Or we have an envying life, which is an inferiority complex. This is very interesting. That being conceited manifests in a superiority complex or an inferiority complex. Paul is saying both of them are forms of conceit. Both the superior person and the inferior person are completely self-absorbed. Because their entire life is focused on how other people make them look or make them feel, and not on how they make others look and feel. And you see, without the gospel, we all lean to one or the other. Most of us lean to one or the other. We either live our life feeling better than others, or we live our life feeling less than others. Let me ask you some questions. Do we have a tendency to blow up, or do we have a tendency to clam up? Do I tend to pick arguments with people, or do I completely avoid confrontation? Do I tend to get very down on different individuals and groups of people? Or am I more often embarrassed and intimidated around groups of people or individuals? When someone criticizes me, do I get very angry and very judgmental and very defensive and simply attack right back? Or do I get very discouraged and I make a lot of excuses and just kind of give in? Do I often think to myself, I would never, ever, ever do what this person is doing. I am so much better than that. That is beneath me. Or do I look at people around me and say things like, I could never accomplish what they've accomplished. I could never be as successful as they are. You see, both of those are forms of conceit. They're empty of honor. They're empty of glory. What does the Bible say? Paul says in Romans 12, do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. I'm never to feel better than anyone else. Do not be conceited. Now, I don't know where you fall on the spectrum, but for me personally, I've struggled my entire life with an inferiority complex. I've always felt inferior. And I know that may surprise you because I know how to put on, an air of confidence. I know how to perform when I need to perform, and know how to act confident when I need to act confident. But inside, for most of my life, I've struggled with inferiority. And very likely it goes back to the root of my father leaving us when I was very young and never feeling like, well, if I wasn't worth enough for him to stick around, if I wasn't worth enough for him to love me, maybe I don't have any worth. Maybe I'm defective. And I've always felt intimidated. I always felt inferior inside, so I put on the mask of confidence to hide what's really going on the inside. Like for years in the ministry, you put me in a room full of pastors, I always felt out of place. Like the best way I could put it is I always felt like the hot dog in a steakhouse. Like one of these don't belong. And honestly, that's how I always felt because it's just, and you know what? One of the encouraging things that happened for me recently, when Pastor Rick Bezette was here a couple weeks ago, one of my overseers, we were at dinner, and he said, when I first met you 8 years ago, you were the most insecure person. He goes, I don't know what's happened over the last couple years, but I've seen you come into a confidence that you didn't have before. Really, what it comes down to is I began to believe what God has said about me instead of trusting my own feelings. You see, what real humility is, because again, humility is the opposite of being conceited. What real humility is submitting myself to God. See, when I humble myself, I submit myself to God. I submit myself to what God has said. So if God has said that I'm the head and not the tail, if God has said greater is in me than he that is in the world, if God has said that I'm a son and not a slave, then who am I to think or feel anything else? Who am I to... Can I tell you, you can't trust your feelings. Your feelings will lie to you. Your feelings will tell you you're not good enough, or they'll tell you you're too good. Like either way, your feelings, you have to trust truth. And so I had to get to a place where I began to believe the truth about what God... See, when I feel insecure, when I feel low self-esteem, when I feel inferior, that is the greatest form of pride in my life. Why? Because what I'm doing is saying what I feel about myself is greater than what God has said about me. I'm actually placing myself above God, and that is pride. Anytime you put yourself above God, it's pride. So I had to get to the place where, yes, I may feel this way, but it's not the truth of who I am. I had to get to the place where I accept the truth. As King David said, I praise you because I am fearfully and I am wonderfully made. I had to get to the place where I accepted the fact that God did not make me inferior, that God did not make me less than. God made me perfect for who he wanted me to be. I am fearfully and I am wonderfully made. You see, the key is that we have to have a gospel-based self-image. You have to look at yourself through the gospel. And that'll make you incredibly bold and incredibly humble at the same time. And this will impact all of your relationships. It'll impact the way you treat people. You see, what I think about me is not the most important thing. What you think about me is not the most important thing. The only thing that matters in my life is what does Christ think about me. This is something that you'll get a chance to work out in your small group this week. It's one of the discussion items that you'll get to talk through. But the reality is, without the gospel, all of us are going to fall to either a superiority complex or to an inferiority complex, or swing back and forth between the two. It's through the gospel that I realize that yes, I'm humble because I'm a sinner. And I need Jesus, and I'll never be good enough to save myself. But at the very same time, I'm incredibly bold because I realize how loved and accepted I am by the most powerful person in the universe. And it gives me this sense that impacts the way I treat everyone around me. The second thing we see here, the second principle, is a restoration for those overtaken by sin. If we're going to be people of the gospel, we have to live a life where we're willing to restore people who have been overtaken by sin, overtaken by addiction, overtaken by some bondage in their life that they can't get free of. Now, here's the point. If you don't get number one right, you won't be able to do the next three. See, Paul sets the stage that we have to first deal with the conceit in our life if anything else is going to work. You see, without a gospel self-image, I'm not going to have the humility and the boldness to help people become the Christians that they are to become. Verse 1, Paul says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught, and the word caught is key there, in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. So here's how it worked. If I don't get point number one right, I can't get the following three. Why? If I have a superiority complex in my life, if I feel like I'm better than other people, when I find somebody caught in sin, I'm going to look down on them. I'm going to look down on them. I'm going to say to myself, I'm so glad I'm not like them. I'm so glad I don't struggle with that. I'm so glad that I'm somehow better than they are because I would never do what they're doing. And I lose the ability to help them. Their sin simply becomes something that I can compare myself to and say, look how good I'm doing in comparison to who they are. So with the superiority complex, I can't do this. But at the very same time, with an inferiority complex, I also can't do it. Why? Because somebody who feels inferior craves the approval of others, so I will be afraid to confront them. I will be afraid to help them for fear of losing the relationship. So if I don't deal with the conceit in my life, I can't help people become the Christians God has called them to become. Now let me help explain this. This doesn't mean somebody who just makes a mistake. When the word caught is used, it's talking about habitual. It's talking about like an addiction, somebody who can't get out of it. They're caught, they're trapped, they're stuck. This is not someone who just makes a mistake, somebody who just blows it, somebody who just does something outside of their character. So we don't walk around and if somebody sins, like, boom, I got you, I caught you. No, that's not what it's talking about. In fact, Peter puts it like this: above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. The way we're to respond to most situations is with grace. Just say, you know what, that's outside of their character. I don't need to call them on it. They know that wasn't the best thing to do. I'm just going to cover it. What Paul is talking about here is somebody who is habitually living in sin, somebody who's caught, somebody who's trapped, somebody who cannot get free because it's some form of addiction in their life, that they need the help of others. They need a form of intervention in their life if they're going to get free. Here's the key. We gently restore. There's got to be gentleness to it, being neither quick to criticize nor afraid to confront. Again, if I feel superior, I'll be too quick to criticize. If I feel inferior, I'll be afraid to confront. Now, the word restore here in the text is a medical term. It's the word that a medical doctor of this time period would use to reset a dislocated bone. Like if you have a dislocated shoulder, they would restore the shoulder back into its rightful place in the body, because when it's dislocated, it's not in its rightful place. It's not relating to the rest of the body the way it needs to relate to the rest of the body. But if you've ever reset a bone that is out of place, it's very, very painful. Like if you've ever seen somebody get their shoulder put back into socket, it's very, very painful, but it's a healing pain. So what Paul is saying is this is going to be a painful process to restore somebody. But it's going to be a healing pain in their life. Because the reason we're restoring them is because they're not in right relationship with the rest of the body. And so we want to restore them, bringing them back into right relationship so that they begin to function the way God designed them to function. I remember in my life when this took place. For those of you that know my story, for years I lived with a secret sin, with an addiction in my life that consumed me. And I was dislocated. I was not living the life I was supposed to live, and something was dislocated in my life. And as a result, it was affecting and destroying my marriage. It was destroying other relationships I had. It was keeping me from really being close to God the way I wanted to be close to God, because something was dislocated in my life, and it needed to be reset. It needed to be restored, but it was going to be very, very painful. And I remember about 10 years ago being at dinner with some friends of ours who pastor a church in Australia. And my buddy's wife, she is scary because God speaks to her and tells her things and details about your life that you don't want people to know, like secrets and stuff. And she's just one of these people that God just tells her stuff. And it's always terrifying to be around her because you never know what God has told her. And I remember sitting at dinner with her that night, and she looks across the table, and it's my wife and my buddy and her, and she just looks across point blank in the eye, and she says, and I knew the look in her eye, I knew, oh no, God just told her something, and I'm in trouble. And I look, and she says to me, she goes, you have a secret that you haven't told anybody, a sin that you're dealing with, and you need to go home tonight, and you need to tell your wife everything. And that began the process of putting my shoulder back in place. And can I tell you, it was painful. It's one of the most difficult years I've ever been through, but it was a healing pain that put me back in right relationship with the body, the way I was created to live. And that's what Paul is talking about here. But there's a huge key in how we do this. And it's at the very end. He says, watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Now, what does that mean? It means when you're restoring somebody, never think that you can't fall. Never think that somehow you're immune to what they're dealing with or what they're struggling with, or somehow that you're better than them because you would never struggle with that. You may not fall to that, but there's something in your life that you're prone to fall to. And if you have pride, you're not going to be able to restore them in a gentle way that's going to heal and bring them back in a right relationship with the body. Here's the third thing we see. Carry each other's burdens. Carry each other's burdens. Verse 2, and it says something very interesting. It says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way. In what way? In the way of carrying each other's burdens. In that specific way, in the specific way of carrying each other's burdens, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, we know the law of Christ is different from the law of the Old Testament. The law of Christ is the Christian life. It's the life of grace. It's the life of following Jesus. It's life-giving. What is Paul saying? He's saying the way you fulfill Christianity, the way you follow Jesus, the way you fulfill the law of grace is you carry each other's burdens. Now, why is this the law of Christ? Because Christ is the ultimate example of this type of love. Look what Jesus says in John 13, a new command I give you. Now, it wasn't new. This command was actually in the Old Testament. They just weren't doing it. So Jesus is saying, look, guys, here it is. Love one another. Well, how do we do that? How do we love one another? Okay, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. How do we love one another? The way Jesus loved us. I want you to think about this. How did Jesus love you? Like when you lived your life ignoring him and you lived your life doing things that hurt him and broke his heart for you, doing things that kind of, not the life that you were supposed to live, did he hold it against you? Did he beat you up over it? Did he condemn you over it? Or did he heal you? Did he forgive you? Did he restore you? Could you imagine if we did that in our marriages? What our marriages would look like? If we just treated our wife or treated our husband the very same way Jesus treated us, instead of holding everything against them, we just said, you know what, Jesus didn't hold it against me, I'm not going to hold it against you. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. You see, what is Paul saying? Paul is saying that we are not to allow people to carry their burdens on their own. That when we see somebody carrying a burden, we're to carry that burden with them. What are burdens? They're financial. They're emotional. They're physical. We have single parents in our church, single moms, single dads, carrying the burden of trying to raise children on their own. We're not to allow them to carry that burden alone. We're to step in and help when we can help. When we see people struggling. I think about one of our board members, Jim Grant. Jim, he carries a burden on a regular basis. He goes down to group homes with boys that have been abused, boys that have been abandoned, boys that have gotten themselves in trouble. And he goes and volunteers as a mentor. And it's not easy. It's hard. It's emotionally taxing. It takes time. It takes money. It takes resources. There are times that he pours his heart into a young man that has grown up in a dysfunctional, broken family, and he doesn't know how to respond. He doesn't know how to act. And after months and months and months of caring for him, the kid turns and stabs him in the back because he doesn't trust anybody. It'd be so much easier to quit and to walk away than to carry those burdens with other people. I think about the foster care system in Southern California. They say the majority of kids who get put in foster care here in Southern California, it's not because of bad parents, it's because of poverty and just financial situations where the family just can't provide for their children, and so the kids are removed from loving parents. That's why as a church, we recently began the process of, our youth pastor's fiance just started building relationships with all the local agencies and the government agencies, and because we want to step in and make a difference. We don't want children removed from good parents because they can't afford a refrigerator or they can't afford a bed or they don't have clothing or they don't have basic necessities. And the state doesn't want that to happen either, but their hands are tied. If the kids aren't being provided for, they have to remove them. So we're stepping in as a church and we want to carry these burdens. We're developing a whole foster care intervention program right now where we can step in and work with these families and help keep these families together by carrying the burden with them. See, what does it mean to carry a burden? It means to come alongside of somebody and allow them to take the weight of what they're carrying and distribute it on our shoulders. So they don't have to carry all of the weight on their own, but we're now supporting them. But that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest for a moment. That is the problem. Like, we really don't mind being generous, do we? We actually like being generous in today's world. As long as we can afford the generosity, we like it. Because if we're very, very honest about it, most generosity is selfish, isn't it? I'm not really being generous to help a person in need. I'm being generous for how it makes me feel, how it makes me look. I get to pat myself on the back. And see, here's how I know this to be true. We don't mind being generous if it doesn't affect us. Like, I'll give you time if I have free time. I'll give you money if I'm not going to miss it. But what many of us in today's culture will not do is be generous in such a way where it actually burdens me. If I have to feel the burden, I'm not going to do it, in other words. Like, I'll give if I don't miss the money, if it doesn't affect my lifestyle. But if there's something that I need to buy right now or I really want to buy right now, some luxury item in my life, and it comes to helping you or getting what I really want, am I willing to carry the burden? Like, I don't mind giving you my time if I've got nothing going on. But if I have a hobby that I'm really interested in doing and somebody needs my time, I don't want to carry the burden if I have to feel it. Like, I'll give, but I don't want to actually have to carry the burden. And what Paul is saying is Christianity is all about coming alongside of people who are under heavy burdens. And not just giving to the burden, but carrying the burden to the extent that we feel it too. He says in Ephesians, follow God's example. See, God did this for us. Therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us, and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. This is how we're to live our life. For those of us that have committed ourselves to Jesus Christ, this is our mandate. We are to offer ourselves up, to offer our time, to offer our resources, to offer what we have to those that are hurting, to carry those burdens with them. But here's the key. Here's the good news. Only through Christ do we have the strength and ability to follow his example and carry his burdens. You can only do it with his help. The good news is you can't do this on your own. You don't have the ability. You can be generous without Christ. You can't carry burdens without Christ because you'll burn out. But see, here's the problem. Most of us look at a burden and we're afraid to take a step because we know it's going to cost us and we know it's going to hurt and we know we're going to feel it. And so we never take the step, not realizing that it's only when we take the step that Christ shows up and gives us the ability and strength to do it. See, it's when you take that step and you begin to help somebody. You may say, well, I don't have the ability. I don't have the strength. Take a step and watch it show up. See, Paul says in Philippians, I can do all of this. How? Through him who gives me the strength. When you step out to carry a burden, the strength is going to show up. The strength may not show up before you take the step, but I promise you, see, when you believe that to be true, you take that step and you pick up that burden, all of a sudden the strength shows up. The strength rarely shows up before. Rarely do you think you can. Rarely do you think you have the ability. But when you take that step, even when you think you can't, all of a sudden Christ gives you the strength, he gives you the ability, and you carry that burden. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, so if you stay connected, so again, you can't do this without him, you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. Don't try to carry a burden without Jesus. And again, this week in your small group, you'll have a chance to talk this out, because all of us have opportunities in front of us. And the question is, what are we doing about it? And then here's the final thing. Finally, carry your own load. Carry your own load. We carry each other's burdens, but we also carry our own load. Now what does that mean? Well, let's look at it. Verse 3. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. In other words, again, if you're conceited, if you think you're better than others, you're not going to have the heart of a servant to be able to help people. Each one should test their own actions, not test other people's actions, test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves. That's not conceit. That is a healthy pride in what God is doing in your life. And here's the key, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. The key is, who are you comparing yourself to? If you compare yourself to the wrong person, you're going to get a wrong read on where you're at in life. What do I mean? If you're around a lot of selfish people, like if you spend time with a lot of very, very selfish people, by comparison, you're going to feel really good about yourself, aren't you? You're going to feel like, man, I am so much better than these people. Like, I am so much more giving. I'm so much more caring. I'm so much more loving. These are such selfish people. So you're automatically going to assume you're farther along than you really are. And you'll have a tendency to stop growing, to stop maturing, because you'll assume in comparison you're where you need to be or you're further than you need to be because of everyone around you. But on the flip side, if you hang out with people who are just very loving and very compassionate and very generous and very caring, then you'll have a tendency to feel like I'm nowhere near where I need to be. Like, I have so much further to go. Like I have issues. Like I am so much less than I think I am. When, in reality, you may be exactly where God wants you and progressing at the exact pace God wants. You see the danger of comparing yourself? You compare yourself with people who you think is less than you, you're going to get a wrong read. You compare yourself with people you think that is better than you, you're going to get a wrong read. But I want you to see something. There's what appears to be a contradiction. In verse 2, Paul says, carry each other's burdens, right? And then in verse 5, he says, each one should carry their own load. So what is it? What is it? Like, am I supposed to do this or am I supposed to do that? Well, the key is in the wording. See, the word burdens, when you study it in the original language, it means a heavy weight, like a struggle, a challenge, a trial that somebody is going through in their life. The word load in the original Greek language is like a backpack. It's what, like if you were a tradesman and you were going to do a job and you had to bring your tools with you, your tools were your load. You see, one is a negative connotation, one is a positive connotation. One is like a hard, challenging situation in life. The other one is basically your strengths, your gifts, your abilities, your talents. Every single person sitting here today has a unique load that God created you with. You have strengths, you have abilities, you have talents. You have spiritual gifts in your life. And what he's saying here is you need to carry your load. Don't compare yourself to others. Don't try to be what somebody else is. No, you have to be the best you can be. You've got to take all of your strengths, all of your abilities, all of your talents, all of your gifts, and be responsible for them. Do you realize this is the exact reason why we do a growth track at our church? The only reason we do growth track is to help you discover what your load is. Because how can you be responsible for carrying your own load if you don't even know what it is? Like if you don't know what your spiritual gifts are, how can you be responsible to carry them, to use them, to make a difference with them if you've never taken the time to figure out what they are? This is also, in turn, the very reason why we have a dream team and not volunteers. You see, volunteers are people who may or may not be carrying their own load. Why? Because a volunteer goes and does what they feel is needed. Somebody who carries their own load takes the time to figure out what's in my tool bag. What are my gifts? What are my strengths? What are my abilities? How can I be responsible to carry what God has given me and find a place to serve, find a team to be on that is created for somebody just like me, and somebody like me is created just for it? You see the difference? Again, a volunteer may not be carrying their own load. A volunteer may be volunteering to carry somebody else's load, and it wasn't what they were created to do. What we have to do is what Paul says in Corinthians, examine yourselves. So let me ask you the question, have you ever examined yourself? Have you ever taken a spiritual gifts test? Have you ever taken a personality profile? Have you ever taken a leadership assessment to examine yourself? Again, this is why we do Growth Track. To help you examine yourself to see whether you are in the faith. And then it says, test yourselves. Well, have you tested your strengths? Have you found a dream team to test, to see, is this where I fit? Is this what God has called me to? Is this the best play for my life? Do you not realize that Christ Jesus is in you, unless, of course, you fail the test, meaning you don't even try. Like you don't take any responsibility for the load that you've been given. Every one of you have been given an incredible load from God, strengths, gifts, talents, abilities, tools to use for the kingdom. And I'm telling you, when you begin to look at life this way, it'll be very hard to judge and criticize others. Why? Because you're going to be comparing yourself with your load and not someone else's load. Because we all have a different load that we've been given. See, when I see somebody like blow up, like if I see someone like cussing somebody out at a store because they're angry over something, when I'm living my life this way, then I react completely different. I think on the inside instead of, look at this idiot. Like I would never behave that way. Like, how dare they do something like that? Instead, I look at the person and say, look, I don't know what pressure the person is facing, and I don't know what level of emotional self-control they've been given. I don't know their family of origin or what their parents was like or what their childhood was like. Maybe this person is actually loving God better than me today, because they're using all of the love they've been given. Let's look at it like this. Let's say we all have the max potential is 10 units of love. And let's say somebody grew up in a really dysfunctional family. They had really abusive parents. They had a very rough childhood. And all they have is 1 unit of love in their life right now. And you were born into, you have great parents and great role models and a great life. And you have 8 units of love in your life. See, here's the danger. The person with 1 unit of love, we may see them like blow up, cussing somebody out, and we may be looking down on them, thinking to ourselves, man, look at this person. Like, how dare they treat another human being that way? Not realizing it takes all 1 units of their love. Like, they're using 100% of their love to keep themselves from knocking the person out. Like, literally, it takes every ounce of love that person has, to just cuss the person out and not punch them out. And it's easy for us to look down on them, not even realizing that at best, most days, we're only using 5 units of the 8 units of love we've been giving. So let's ask the question, who's using more love? Like, this person is using 100% of their 1 unit. We're barely using the units that we've been given. See the danger of comparing yourself? So what's the key? We compare ourselves against ourselves and never against others. The truth is, you are the best you anybody will ever be. Nobody will ever be a better you than you. God created you exactly the way He wanted you. People may try to imitate you. Nobody will ever pull off you better than you. And so if you stop trying to compare yourself to what somebody else has been given or where somebody else is at, and you just be the very best you that God has made you to be, there's freedom, and it's liberating to live that way. And that's what Paul's getting at. And the only way we do this is through the gospel. Would you close your eyes with me for a moment? Father, today I pray that each one of us would take a step to begin to look at our life through the gospel. Lord, that the gospel would produce in us this incredible humility and an incredible boldness that'll impact all of our relationships. We'll not look down on other people, but we'll also not look down on ourselves. Lord, at times when it needs to be restoration, we'll gently restore people. We won't be quick to criticize, nor will we be afraid to confront. When we see burdens, we'll come alongside people and we'll let them distribute the weight onto our shoulders, and we'll carry the burden with them, knowing that in that moment you will give us the strength and you will give us the ability. As scary as it looks to help somebody in need, you will be there to help us. And you'll give us everything we need. And most of all, God, we will examine ourselves to figure out, what load did you give me? What pack did you give me? And how can I be responsible for carrying the load that you've given me? And not compare what you've given me with what you've given anyone else in a way where I look down on others or in a way where I look down on myself, but I just, Lord, live each day being the best me you've created me to be. Thank you for the gospel and the freedom and the power it gives us to live our life. In the name of Jesus, amen. Would you stand with me? We're going to close with one song of prayer. As we always do, the prayer team will be available. If you're here and you just, something's going on in your life, maybe something in the message hit a nerve, maybe you're spiritually not where you need to be. And you realize, you know what, I need to take a step today. I don't even know what that looks like. But I know I need to take a step because spiritually speaking, I'm not where I need to be. Our prayer team would love to talk to you. They would love to pray with you. Don't miss that opportunity to let somebody pray with you. Maybe you need to give your life to Jesus today. It'll be the greatest decision you'll ever make. And I can't explain fully in a minute what that means and what that looks like, because there is an element of a step of faith. But I can tell you, when you take that step of faith and you come to God and say, God, I don't know exactly everything that it means, but I know I need to surrender my life completely to you, and I'm willing to take a step and do that today, it'll be the greatest decision you'll ever make. So we're going to worship together. The prayer team will be available.